Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you all for coming this late at night to our weekly Q&A. So I'm TJ, I'm a specialist in highly gifted education, and I'm here to make the world better by helping gifted kids become more happy, autonomous, and successful. And today we're going to be talking about two very, very important challenges that almost all gifted kids at some point in their life run into, and that is the challenge of metacognition and kind of similar and very much related, the challenge of executive functioning. And it might be good if I first go a little bit into what metacognition is for those that don't know. Metacognition is basically the ability to learn, right? So it's learning to learn in simple terms. And when we view metacognition from education perspective, there's a lot of assumption that kids learn this skill by going through school in its normal trajectory. And what I tend to see a lot in Asia is that a lot of focus tends to be on the result of what a school needs to do, and not so much on how kids are really learning how to learn. And that is a problem. And that's particularly a problem for gifted kids because they have some needs that are slightly different than other kids. And I'll be very honest, like metacognition as a skill is probably the most important skill that you could learn in your life. And that applies to everybody. Really, it does. However, with anything gifted related, what we know is that whenever somebody else runs into a challenge, and it's difficult, gifted kids tend to run into that challenge faster and often a lot more intensely. And therefore, the problems that not being good at metacognition that creates are often more intense for gifted kids. And as a result, they often drop out of school. They definitely underperform. There's lots of reasons why underperforming is really a big issue there, of course, as well. So we have to be mindful of how we help our kids get this skill. And I'll be frank, when it comes down to every little bit of our curriculum, there's always this thing behind us. Okay, what can we do to help our kids get there? So what are the key elements to what normal metacognition should look like, right? So first of all, it starts with really looking at your own brain as if you are a third person, right? So what can you do that allows you to see what's going on and how your brain responds. And this used to be very philosophical field. So like a great philosophers like Confucius, Tao, but also other great thinkers, Plato, you name it, have always been busy with what can I do to become a better learner? Like what is the things that I need to do to make sure that learning is something that I get exceptionally good at, and what can I do to make sure that like that keeps happening? And Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy, they had a lot of similarities and then also quite a lot of different approaches. Like the West tends to be a little bit more focused on you as an individual, whereas the East tends to be very much focused on what is the greater good towards the society as a whole and how can you be a part of that. And what is really nice, if you look at those different philosophy styles, is if you start looking into them very deeply, is that they all come down to a very similar kind of conclusion, that everything starts with thought. So what is the important thing here? And then when you really think of it, when we start school, you hear often the idea of, okay, let's talk about thinking. That doesn't happen that often, definitely not in kindergarten. The very common one that does get asked is like, what do you want to be when you grow up, which is things like, I want to be a fireman, you name it. But like when you talk about metacognition, the important part is to really start with the end in mind. So what is it that you want to achieve? And I'll be very frank, in my work here in Asia, even when I work with kids in A levels, this what is my goal question is existential for a lot of them. They really have no idea what their goals are. There's a really interesting story that particularly Dave Chappelle, maybe you guys know him, a very famous comedian, tells about him going through an experience that was quite daunting. For those that have seen his show called The Dreamer, you might have run into the story where he talks about his very first breakthrough in terms of becoming getting a special for ABC. And that goes awry. He ends up somewhere in the layer of a mob boss. And I'm not a stand-up comic, so I'm definitely not doing that story justice in terms of how he tells it. But he says one very, very important thing in that. And he says he was in a super dangerous situation, and yet, whilst he wasn't in that dangerous situation, he never felt wrong. He never felt lost. He felt like he knew what was going on. The reason he was there is because the club that essentially was paid off supposedly by his crew to stop playing music so he could record his special started playing music regardless. And what tended to happen was that that the mobsters weren't paid for that particular privilege, so they started playing their music regardless. What he said, though, is in that situation when he realized, oh, actually, it's my fault, and he lost almost that ability to be supernaturally like strong about what he believed was his right to be. He said, "What I realized is that the reason I felt invincible is that I'm a really big dreamer." And what he said specifically to the people in there, because he was doing a special for 50,000 people, he said, "You are all in my dream. I dreamt about this moment when I was 14 years old, and you are here for that dream." And then he goes on in that story and he says, actually, when I then went to a club a little bit later, and there was somebody else on the table next to him partying with champagne and all kinds of other things, like beautiful women, other important people, seeming to have a good time. And Dave Chappelle was looking at it, man, that looks fun. And this guy toasted to him, and he sort of bedazzled toasted back, and he said, "I realized I was in his dream." And he says it is important to realize, when are you in your own dream and when are you in somebody else's? And when it comes to how we help our kids now, and this need for gifted kids to feel that there needs to be some purpose to life, when we talk about metacognition, and a really crucial skill that we see that they really struggle with is that inability to sometimes realize that they need to start setting their own dream, particularly when we're talking about our IGCSE students that are having their exams, and the choices that they need to make in terms of where they want to go with the rest of their life. And in order for like that, when I see these kids and they're in this stressful time and they're being asked, particularly in A levels, to start writing to universities, like, where are you going to go? What am I going to do? The metacognition ability that a lot of our 16, 17-year-olds have is really lacking. They are not thinking about goals. Their goals are their parents. And that is a challenge, right? Because if there is no goal, right, then the feelings that we have around things that we're doing become really difficult. Right. So what we see is that if the goals aren't theirs, their fear of failure tends to go up. Their perfectionism tends to go up. The way that they get overwhelmed tends to go up as well. Now, and all that creates avoidance behavior. Like, one of the things that we really look out for with gifted kids is what flavor of avoidance behavior do they have? And it can be procrastination. I would argue that perfectionism is actually a type of avoidance behavior as well, but we do see quite distinct ways, different ways that kids deal with it. So it helps explain it as a separate category, but it is a type of avoidance behavior. The boredom that comes out of it too, the lack of engagement, and then for gifted kids particularly, the low challenge that comes with it, right? Because passion or doing things really meaningful, and having the agency to choose something meaningful enough to be able to say, I want to take responsibility for this, it's difficult, right? So because they have no goal, the feelings that they feel seem disconnected to them. And when you have disconnected feelings, overwhelm tends to feel a lot more intense at that point, right? So they struggle with this. What we need to do is we need to start this cycle, and then we don't even get to try, for example. A lot of them just do, they don't try, they don't do anything new. A lot of them are hyper focused on skills that they think are the ways that they can get attention, or that follows the dreams of their parents. And something nice to say about the dreams of these kids when they do get them, because it's actually quite encouraging as a parent to know that you have quite a lot of options there with the kids. Okay, so because once people trying is only useful if fail or succeed, you reflect afterwards. And that reflection has to be meaningful and deep. And then particularly our twice exceptional kids on the spectrum can teach us a lot about this. A very interesting story about that shortly. But and then of course reflecting is pointless if you don't adjust, right? And the adjustment, like what should I try next, would then lead to more thinking, and then you have a cycle going, right? So this is ideally what we would like to see with everybody. And when you look at it, it's like, yeah, that's logical. But how do you get kids to get to that stage? That's a bit of a tricky one. And we're going to go into that a little bit more detail shortly. So when we work with the kids, the very first thing, again, is we ask them, it's okay, like, what is your goal? What do you want to do? Some of you have probably seen some of our posts online about SMART goals. You've maybe heard your kids talk about it. For the ones that have had a look at the portfolios, you see almost every project has some kind of SMART goal in it. And even when they do our board games, there's SMART goals involved. They have to set goals. And that is that we're trying to help them make this a habit. Okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to relate my goal to a time, and there we go. Right? Anything we do, that is not that easy. If you look at like from these young kids, because when you're asking them, it's like how much do you think you can do? A huge chunk of them really struggle to be honest with themselves. And again, what happens, like one of the challenges when you set a goal is that like it's kind of like towards fixed mindset thinking. So a goal in itself can basically create a situation where you start working for an extrinsic motivator. So when we look at goals and when we work with the kids, we're trying to make sure that the goals describe the actions that need to be taken as clearly as possible, so that we as educators can actually help them look into that a lot more. Right. So one of the questions that was asked was like, okay, like I have a smart kid, like how come it's so difficult for them to set goals, or how come it's like they can learn to do math by themselves, but for some reason they're not able to learn how to study. And the answer to that is that like either one of two things. It's the success loops that they have with getting recognition, getting the easy dopamine, right? So they do something quick. And one of the things that I find with a lot of the kids that I've been coaching recently is that I've been asking them a lot about like, hey, so like how skilled are you really at something? Is there and one of the things that's very addictive to give the kids is that it takes them sometimes only an hour to learn something new, which is very wonderful. And if you are running around and like today I speak only English, and then I pick up something that teaches me some basics of German, but which should take most people about 10 hours to actually get something meaningful out of. If then all of a sudden, like 1 week later, they run into somebody say, "Hey, like I heard you picked up German," and you say, "Yeah, I can speak one or two sentences now." Like, and they'll say, "Like, yeah, I speak a bit, I basic German," and that seems amazing. But to get then to the next step, which is learning it like meaningfully, it's like to a mastery level, you would still need a good 100 to 1,000 hours to get anywhere useful, and that's the kind of boring bit. So it's much easier to say, you know what, I'm just going to learn Spanish next week, because now I speak basic German and basic Spanish, and I keep doing that. I can say I speak 30 languages, and you end up seeing people on YouTube saying stuff in like these 20 languages as if they're like super smart. And to be honest, they probably are clever, but like I can guarantee you that majority of those kind of YouTubers maybe speak the first 5 basic sentences that everybody learns when you learn a language, and therefore you get stuck. So the idea is that when we talk about metacognition, it's the ability for these kids to recognize that these loops of success are actually detrimental to them becoming an actual master in something. Because whilst when you're young, it can be a really good advantage to have like some extra skills you can pick up. I can read quickly, and some of these skills will make the other things like easier to learn as well, right? So like the strategy normally takes quite a long time before it becomes kind of problematic, particularly because in early years things constantly keep being repeated as well, right? So like it's the way that we set up the classes for young kids is that like we sort of introduce the topic, and then maybe the year after or even half a year later we revisit the topic again and again, and we expand on it a little bit. So it actually keeps it easy for gifted kids to keep up until key stage 3, when we start seeing that they really get into a little bit of trouble. But the higher the intelligence is, or the more luck they have in terms of like having access to easy learning, the later this sort of manifests, right? So, um, yeah, so that's one reason why they struggle. It's because they actually learn quick. Like, so that's one other reason, right? So they skip that rote learning aspect of what is still useful to some extent in school. The other reason why they really struggle is that they have a tendency to avoid situations that are uncomfortable. And taking feedback, and particularly looking for feedback on how good you are at learning, and is kind of yeah, difficult for most people already. Like you have to really learn how to get feedback and take those kind of things on the chin. And particularly the more you like somebody, sometimes the harder it is to take feedback. And so for young kids, this is tough. But even for our teens, they tend to be very lonely in that regard. So they sort of exclude themselves, and because they look like they're doing well, they're also not getting any kind of feedback on it. And when I start working with teens that we haven't really been working with in the younger years, it takes me quite a while to build up enough of a relationship with the kids that they feel that they can actually get that feedback without going into defensive mode. And that is because, again, being told you need to work on yourself is very tough. And this is particularly when I use Stoic teaching with the kids. Stoic teaching is amazing, but it always boils down to it's actually kind of your fault. And if it isn't, then you shouldn't be bothering with it anyways. Like, so it is kind of a harsh philosophy. It's definitely not one I can bring to the kids very early on. It needs a very strong emotional resilience before they can start thinking about things like that. And most of the other philosophies are not really different in that. So, like, where our gifted kids really struggle is with that, like, goal setting and then how to feel about this. Like, these two things is where they really struggle, right? So that is where I think we need to look for. So what do we do? How do we help them in Passend, and and then eventually we can look at like what we do at home as well. So a big chunk of the actual metacognition learning and executive functioning learning that we work with is particularly projects. And our projects are always a bit contentious because when you look at some of our projects that Gifted Kids start and not necessarily finish, compared to some of the projects that get thrown at them in normal school, some of their projects might look like they are kind of missing the point. Like, oh, how come things aren't working the way that we want to? And one of the main reasons why that is because creativeness. So if we're saying like, are we actually creative? It's kind of a problem if you really think of it, right? So being creative sounds like a good thing, but being creative means doing things in different ways. Doesn't mean doing things right. That is so important. Being creative is not going to an art class and then learning how to draw. You're learning a skill how to draw. If you draw a house that looks the same, that looks like this, right? You're not being creative. Right? Like most of the kids, they learn how to draw a house like this. And now you tell me what house looks like this in Malaysia. I don't think anybody lives in a house that has like a pointy roof like this. I don't even know in the Netherlands we have houses much like this anymore. But this is a type of a house that in Malaysia doesn't exist. long houses, like the kind of long houses that basically have the roof facing that way, and obviously there's 20 cars in front, would make much more sense. And 90% of the kids I work with live in condos. So why are they not drawing a house like a condo? It's an interesting question to ask, right? So what is real creativity? Creativity is doing novel things that nobody else has done, or combining things in a way nobody has combined before. And that isn't always just art, to be honest. But when it comes to being creative, it means that, like, when you get a project in a school, most projects in schools' job is to try and teach curriculum. Like, they want to reinforce a particular kind of learning. And it sort of assumes that some of the metacognition skills needed to do this are already present. And we see an asynchronous development in gifted kids with this. And therefore, they start even getting behind a little bit more. It's very common for the gifted kids I work with to be told, yeah, they're not very good at working in groups. They can't explain why certain things want to be done in a certain way. All right. So what we do, though, is we say, actually, our projects are completely open-ended. So there is really um, very little guidance around what particular subject or particular goal that we want to achieve. And there's some reasons for that, and I'll come to that a little bit later. But essentially, we go through 7 steps when it comes to our project, and it starts off with something called idea generation. Now, idea generation sounds simple, right? It's like, okay, we'll come up with a lot of things to do. It's really up to you. But honestly, generating ideas for particularly our gifted kids is really, really, really hard. And you need to do quite a lot of work with them to help them with this. And one of the things that is very different from normal classes is that our job is really not to take that frustration away from them. And that means sometimes kids change ideas all the time. Like, some of them, like, we've had some kids have been that whilst they're in the course of a project, they'll move from one idea to another. And again, this is tied to that, like, oh, I could learn one skill very quickly. Like, I don't like I feel I'm getting stuck. I feel I need to do something different from here, right? So the way we help them is we help them with mind dumping. And one little trick that we use is we basically write down really silly things first that we definitely not going to do, right? So, like, things like as absurd as, like, start a clown school, or, like, I don't know, breed frogs. Although that's actually been suggested as an actual project, but honestly, the crazier the idea, the better it is. And it's all about getting a little bit of that, like, uncomfortableness about uncertainty, because a lot of these kids that struggle to come up with ideas are scared to make mistakes. So by putting silly things in we don't do is very important. And then we help them select. And when we talk about selecting, a very important skill to understand when it comes to making choices is that choices aren't choosing what you want to do. Choices is basically choosing not to do anything else. And therefore, if you mind dump them and there's some cool ideas in there, and there'll be 1 or 2 things where they're going to be hesitating a little bit whether they want to do it or not. Like, sometimes you can combine those 2 ideas into a single idea, and that helps them say, okay, actually, I can't make a choice between those 2. That happens a lot when the 2 options are so close and they want to do. They basically don't know what to do. Like, they say, okay, this is the same. And when you get 2 choices that are exactly the same, you need to basically use another thing, like chance is a very good one, like flip a coin and so on. But for a lot of gifted kids, because they're not used to this freedom, and they crave this freedom, they finally get some autonomy. So they want to use it. Like, so it's a valuable resource. So we have to help them with this. And then also, for the ones that really, really struggle with this, we have to figure out ways for them to understand why that is a struggle. And I'll give you a very good example of this. And this is somebody that was 17 years old. He couldn't make decisions on anything, like, really so worried. Like, he's incredibly smart, this boy. So he sees all the different permutations of what a choice can go to, and he would get what we call analysis paralysis. And basically, the way that I helped him get over that is by doing a project about making choices. So I asked him, why don't you go read up on what making choices is? Like, where does it work in our brain? And I want you to tell me what you find, and we'll help you find academic articles about this. And he found out some really, really interesting bits about all this, particularly about how the neuroscience works and where the decisions are being made. And ever since he wrote that article, he's been getting really good at making decisions, which is really nice to see. But with some of the stuff that he found, which is from very recent works of academics, which I haven't had a chance to look into yet, we've been basically implementing and helping the kids with as well, which is really cool. But like that is the first step, like the idea generation stage. And for some of our kids, this sometimes takes a week. Now, again, if this would be a normal project and the idea would be we want to finish making a solar system, taking a week to come up with an idea, or sometimes even 2 weeks, would be considered a bad thing. But for me, the skill is being able to generate ideas, list them out, look at like what things are not feasible, what things you definitely don't want to do, and then think creatively about the things that you do want to do, how you can combine them so that you don't have to make a choice between them, or then finally roll a die, which one you're going to choose. That skill is invaluable, and once that lands, they can start doing projects whenever they want, right? So much more valuable than just finishing a project from that. But we want them to think a bit more, right? So that's the next step. So what is the underlying reason? So one of the main challenges gifted kids face, according to research from Tasso Baxa and Zuli, is that they really struggle with things that they do that have no meaning to them. So they look for a deeper purpose. A very big indicator to parents for gifted kids is that they'll ask things like, "Oh, how does this work, Dad? How does this work, Mom? Like, what is this? Why?" All these kind of questions. That deep need for that intellectual oversensitivity that we know that they have. Needs to be satisfied. If it's not there, it is significantly harder for them to commit to a task, to complete it, and basically that means that a project is likely to fail, right? So the underlying reason bit is about them doing a little bit of pre-research about what they're about to do, and that can take different forms, like watching some tutorials, then deciding which part of the ones they want to do, ask why they want to do something, how can we use it in some kind of way. And again, this is not us telling them, because again, what we think as like a normal way to think about stuff for very creative kids can sometimes be completely the opposite, or completely misses the mark. And again, we want them to be able to do this on their own. So we ask why. That requires a bit of coaching, and eventually they can coach each other. That takes a while, but essentially this is like biting your tongue. All right. So one thing you can do at home with this, if you have kids that are asking questions why all the time, don't answer the question. Try to ask them, "Oh, that's interesting. Do you need something to figure that out?" And then tell me. Like if you can get into that habit, you'll get a lot more peace and quiet out of the why questions, right? And if it's a philosophical question, like why not debate it? It might teach you something yourself, right? And when we look for this, is we'll ask them to make sure it's like, hey, is this project meaningful? Is it relevant? And is it worthwhile, right? Because if it isn't, there's a very likely chance the kids are not going to engage with it, and that won't help them with any of the next steps, right? So the next step is setting a SMART goal. Some of you might have heard of SMART before, but we have a slight twist to them, because when we say specific, which is making sure that the goal itself is very clear and like purposeful, that you know what it's all about. Measurable, is there something that you can measure? And it doesn't always a number. It's like you could say, has it been a binary thing, has it been done or not? Well, I mean, technically binary is a number too, but let's forget about that for a sec. But yeah, so measurement is like, can I say that something has been completed to satisfaction? That's a way to measure something too. So that's normal. The next one, A, is action oriented. So this is different from achievable. But a lot of people know action-oriented is the idea that you look at a task and what steps are you going to take, or what things do you need to make sure that the task can be completed. And an example of this is like, oh, I'm going to make a 3D bangle by learning how to use Onshape or Tinkercad and make 1 or 2 prototypes that I will test out and print. right? So that's very action oriented. Like, who does it? What do I need to do? What things do I need to learn for it? And like, as they're younger, these are a bit more simple. As they get older, we actually push quite hard on these. Like, what can you do with them? Now, realistic is a bit of a sanity check. Like, can you do it? Like if somebody says, I'm going to create cold fusion, then yeah, okay, it's going to take a little bit a little bit longer. Probably not in 4 weeks or in the 8 weeks that we have in a school term, right? And then finally, that is kind of related to it, the time bound thing, right? So in our situation, because when we do projects, we give them budgets. The realistic is also, does it fit in the budget? And you'd be surprised how fun that is when they come in and we warn them. We say, don't order stuff from China because it will take 2 or 3 weeks to come in. Or if you do, make sure that you have something to do in that 2 or 3 weeks that is meaningful. And then I believe last week, a bunch of the kids were like, "Why is our stuff not there? We ordered it last week." And then we said, "Oh, why don't you have a look at the actual place where it came from?" "Oh, it's China." "Yeah, that's silly of me." And left it at that. Basically, we meant like, okay, now you have to figure out what to do this week that helps you keep going, right? And that actually ties in nicely to the next bit, which is like the critical path, or we call it the bubble map. Now, the bubble map is kind of a concept where if you have a smart goal, so let's say I have a smart goal, all done. And let's say that is make an app, which is an actual smart goal I've had a few of my kids have. So they have this smart goal, there's a time bound, I have 4 weeks to do it, I have 50 ringgit, all great. What we then ask them is to ask the question, can you start right now in this instance, right? So, and this again needs a bit of coaching sometimes, but as they get through it, they actually get quite quick and quite good at this. And it's like, okay, I'm going to build an app. I'm going to build an app to, like, I don't know, like sift through my pictures and delete double pictures, something like that. Great. Can you do this right now? And then it's like, no, like, why not? Well, I don't have my laptop here. I don't have the skills. So it's like, okay, no laptop. So usually no laptop. Maybe they say, oh, I don't know how to program. Need to so learn Python is something that I need to do. So for example, and then it's like, oh, I have to design the app. And then maybe you have to actually code it. And then maybe you have to test it. Right? So there's lots of things that you need to do. You just write them around them and you make little bubbles around them, right? And then after you've got all these things, then you go, okay, well, what is the last thing you do before the app is done? Well, the last thing you would do is basically testing. But in order to test it, I need to first code something. In order to code something, I actually have to design it. Right? In order to design it, I need to understand how Python works. And basically to learn Python, I need to go get my laptop and so on. Now, obviously, this can be quite complex depending on how things are. But what happens now is we have basically a task number one, a task number two, then we have a task number three, a task number four, task number five, and then a task number six. And if you can split this over multiple weeks, so you can say, okay, I can get my laptop in 5 minutes and I can learn Python in the next 1 hour, then this is the first week that I'm working. And then maybe the design and some of the coding, this is like design is week two, the coding is week three, testing and adjusting is week four, and then I have 4 weeks and my thing is done. Right. So this is a very, very basic way of making essentially like a critical path. Like there's versions of this that are a lot more complex, like Gantt charts and stuff that we could use at some point. But this allows us to get our kids to see like, okay, do you have a purpose? Do you have a SMART goal? Like, do you have a critical path? And when we start with kids, like the first time it takes maybe 2 weeks to generate an idea. Like most of the time it's just a week, but some of them really, really struggle. Looking at underlying reasons, a bit of pre-research, maybe also a week. Then setting a SMART goal, like we have special classes that we run just to teach them how to do this. And it involves a lot of fun stuff with like trying, maybe you've seen the video where people have to make like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. We have a version of that with lemonade and stuff. It goes everywhere. It's hilarious. But it's a great way for them to learn how to do this. right? So we sometimes spend like a whole lesson just to explain what a SMART goal is and how it really works, and not by just doing a lecture, but by saying, okay, like write this SMART goal and then see if I can actually make that work. And it's such an important skill again that we believe it's worth spending 1 or 2 weeks on. The bubble math is the same thing there, because it becomes such an important tool to understand whether they're on track or not. And particularly for the kids that have perfectionism, it's so important. If they don't have a proper bubble math running, it is really tough for them to basically keep track of where they are. And the ones that sort of like oversimplify this bubble map, or sometimes like miss a week because they made a little mistake ordering things and stuff like that, they get into trouble a lot with this. So a lot of kids, they struggle there. Now, in order for the bubble map to function, the next thing is what we call the executive functioning skill. And this one is one of those main reasons why it's great to have kids with ADHD in your class, because the stuff that they need, the support that they need to get really good at planning and seeing things through, are what going to make them really good working individuals when they're older and they get a little bit over their ADHD. But the interventions that exist for ADHD executive functioning building work really well for gifted kids as well. And basically what we do is we break stuff into as small a task as possible. Right. So what we say is we use these 15-minute, 20-minute Pomodoro style kind of timers, and we make sure that they have every lesson. There's like 3 to 4 of those like goals that they have, mini goals that they have to hit. When they get older, those mini goals have to be SMART goals too. And we will help them track that time, which basically means like initially we will start with like little timers ourselves. But now what we do is we ask the kids to actually have timekeepers. And every class will have a timekeeper when we're there, and the role of the timekeeper changes. And it's so much, it's fun to see how much the kids want to do with this, because like I have one very young class right now, which is year 2 and 3 that I'm working with, and like they're bringing their watches so that they can be a timekeeper. Right, so there's like, oh, I brought my watch today, can I be a timekeeper please? Right, so just by giving them that opportunity to take some control over it, they're more engaged with it, and as a result, they keep to it a lot more, right? And then the ones that are hardest normally to deal with this, they go like, oh, timekeeping is hard. Then we give them the responsibility of a timekeeper afterwards, and then they go, oh man, it's really hard to keep everybody on track. And then the next week they're the ones that will listen to the next timekeeper quite well. Right, so obviously when it comes down to executive functioning, there's a little bit more than just breaking it down. It's also about prioritization. So what is the first thing that needs to happen in order for a project to be completed correctly? And the staying focused bit, of course, is one where they need a lot of our help. Now, when we do projects like this and the kids are involved with it themselves, what it does for us as teachers is really free us up, look at what they're doing. And if we see them procrastinate or we see them lose focus, we can talk to them about it. But we also can record a little bit of like noticing, oh, this is happening. That if they get to the next bit, which is the presentation, if they're not really aware that they are procrastinating, because some procrastination is very subconscious. It's not always something they do on purpose. Very often they don't do it on purpose, to be honest. So therefore, like, we need to take a little bit of record of this, not to go back to the parents and go, well, your child is not paying a lot of attention in class. I'm hoping, I'm almost certain that I've never used that phrase particularly in any of the conversation with you as parents, because that to me is like shifting the blame away from what is happening in class to the child. Whereas like when it's like not paying attention, the way I tell my teachers and the way I look at it myself is that it's and we tell the kids this too. If you guys feel like you can't stay focused, if it's because our stuff is not difficult or boring enough, then it's my fault as a teacher, and you just have to tell me and we'll do something about it. Right, obviously, Sometimes it's very hard to gauge this because we've had kids that basically 1 week the stuff that we give them is absolutely fine, and then because we're unlocking a lot of this potential, all of a sudden they start like making these big jumps. It's very common for gifted kids to sort of like be trying to be part of the normal class, and they recognize, oh, actually I can do a lot more, I'm allowed to do a lot more, and all of a sudden they make these big jumps and they go from like something that seemed actually okay to being, too easy for them a week later. And that's a good thing, right? So I'm never upset when that happens, even if that means I have to completely rewrite the curriculum next week. Which is one of the other reasons why, when it comes to gifted and talented education classes, it's very common when parents ask me, "What is the curriculum for the year?" I said, "Well, that's like we're going to do a project, and this project is going to follow these very specific steps." But what that project is going to be, who knows? Because if the project is not necessary for this kids, we will move further. And what that can be is like, yeah, like that at some point we can start talking about superconductors or black holes or like multiple dimensions and like quantum physics. Like the world is our oyster in that. And that is kind of the luxury that we have. But the only way we can get there is letting the kids get the feeling that they can make mistakes, potentially not finish a project. Now, the presentation that comes out of this is either a project that did go to plan, and again, it's still about presenting about what they learned. Right? And that is obviously not like they haven't, most of them when they do experiments haven't learned a new scientific revelation. They have learned something. And a lot of times when you see a presentation where it's like, oh, we've proven that I don't know, like you can split hydrogen from water with batteries and stuff. And so, well, you haven't proven something that we didn't know already. You have learned something about that. And then what we are more interested in at Passend Education is like, what have you actually learned about skills and knowledge that you didn't know? Or more importantly, like what have you learned about how you engaged with the actual learning stuff itself? So what is the metacognition bits that you've learned? And we don't use words like that when they're very young, but as they get older, we get very specific about it. And I just had a conversation with somebody in our A-levels mentor program, and she actually was struggling a lot with the preparation for exams. So like she was doing past year papers and not feeling like things were going particularly well. And she would say, "Oh, I'm scoring 60% mark," and all that kind of stuff. And then she did her exam, and she says, like, "I think I've got between 90 to a 95, which is obviously good where we want her to be. But she felt like she made a lot of mistakes and was only hammering on that bit. And then one of the other exams, what she prepared for, and she only did past year papers for that one, which I told her she shouldn't, because there's a chance that the questions being asked are not in your past year papers, and you're kind of screwed. And exactly that happened. It's a hard way to run into that, because obviously she was in a little bit of a distress. And she was like, "Oh, I'm done. Like that. I've done that so poorly, and I can't bring up the energy to study." And to me, the only thing that I was focused on is the fact that this girl hadn't studied forever. I've only been working with her for about 3 to 4 months. It's been that's tough for her, because she was a straight A student last year, and this year she's really struggling. But what happened was she started studying 5 days ago, and she was sending me like, we had an agreement that she was going to send me a message every day on like what she was going to do in the morning, and then at night she was going to send me a message whether it was done. And I didn't tell her what to do or anything else. So you decide what you want to get done. And I asked her that, like, how did it go? So actually, for these last 5 days, I've been waking up at 8. I've been doing like all my revisions, all my stuff until about 8 o'clock at night, with my breaks in between. And then I had some time to actually even play a few computer games and relax. And I went to bed at like 10. So I was very nice and rested the next day. And I said, "Isn't that amazing? Like if you can maintain that particular behavior." And because I asked her, how did it feel to do that? She said, "Oh, it felt very nice." And the moment I've shifted her focus from that exam result to this, He said, yeah, actually, I did enjoy myself. And then I said, okay, well, it's now 11 o'clock in the morning. What are you going to do today? He says, no, well, you know what? I'll send you a message of what I'm going to do. And she just sent me a message just before this meeting that she said, I've done what I had to, what I needed to do. And that is also a form of metacognition that we really have to help these kids get to, right? And the more they practice it, the more easy it gets. And that these 6 and 7 are very connected because the presentation is about what you've learned, so that it's about reflecting. And this is where our that story about like how the kids on the spectrum can really help us, because kids with ASD have sometimes a bit of a trouble connecting empathic questions to situations. So if you ask somebody on the spectrum, what have you learned? They really struggle with this because they've learned a lot. But you're asking them, what have I learned? And then some of them will start telling you from beginning to end what they have done, right? Because that's what they've learned. But what is the essence that you've learned? And there's a particular questions that you have to ask to help them get out of that particular line of thinking, so that they can summarize and they can read. And normally, when they then summarize what they've learned, it is really, really good, right? So we use some of that materials with our gifted kids because they also have a tendency to know and memorize everything. So a lot of them in the same situation, they struggle to really reflect and summarize, which is one of the another reason why a lot of gifted kids, when parents ask them, how was school, what did you learn, they don't know how to answer you. Right? It's like, yeah, should I just, where do I start? 8 o'clock? I walked in and then I did this and then I did this and then I did this. Right. And then like some parents don't even listen to that kind of stuff. Like, so, and then they go, yeah, why am I even starting? That's another one. But some of them get so like confused that they don't know what to say. And the easiest thing to say then is like, well, I don't know. Right. And so this reflection thing should be something that they get better and better and better at. Right. So, and then with all of this, the whole intent is like when we start with kids, this starts from a basis of willpower. So they're doing this consciously, and they're often fighting a lot of their overexcitability. So a lot of these things are quite hard for them to do. Therefore, we have to help them with positive reinforcement to get started with it. So we start with our willpower, right? So willpower. But then, like eventually what we want is we want these things to become a habit, right? So that some of these things happen automatically. Now we wrote a little article on our webpage the other day about how just at the start of the class, the kids started walking up to the board and started putting their own smart goals for the games on there without even being asked. It's like becoming really, really automatic, like to the point, like, and that's kind of the important thing, because what happens here is like every time we ask them to do something that's kind of against what they currently want, it's like you're basically writing a little line of code in their brain that says, okay, I'm doing this subroutine, and at the end, I'm going to get some positive dopamine. And if you do that a few times, then eventually the brain decides, you know what? Why don't we put this in our working memory as a standard decision? And then it happens automatically, right? And then when all these things happen automatically, that's when we go, what can we now do with the projects to really start putting some crazy challenge in there? They're no longer scared. They know how to break it down into small bits. And all of a sudden, these projects go from failed, difficult to all of a sudden, boom, what's going on? And that can, it's really, you see almost like a little light bulb go off in their head. It's really cool when it happens. And then because they have this need to do something big. So we have two kids in the class that were been with us for a bit longer, about like 2 years now, where I've seen that happen. And I've seen it happen in smaller bits for their own personal stuff, but for these two kids, it went from I'm just studying on my own, not doing much else, to one of them is now organizing a hackathon, and he's really, really focused on it, like to the point where the D&T head of D&T, Mr. Kevin, like in the school as well, went to me. He's like, I heard he's doing this. Can I help him? It sounds really cool, right? And another one is organizing a science symposium. So that's where we want to get these kids, and these projects will get them there. But every kid has its own challenge. And if there is bad habits already pre-programmed here, for every bad habit there is, we need to like write 3 lines of positive codes to override it until it gets replaced with a new one. And that's where things can get a little bit tricky. Now, like at home, of course, this is important. Like, what do you do then? Because if you imagine that a lot of these things here are against their willpower, if we challenge them, if we ask them, "Oh, why doesn't that look that good?" You know, you're probably breaking that subroutine, and you're making it even harder a habit for it to be, right? So, all right. I'll touch on this a little bit. For those that have had seen some of the other lectures, basically a big chunk of like we don't have grades in our projects. Why? Because I feel grades are a limiting factor. They're a limiting factor from 2 perspectives. One, if they get an A for something, we don't know what they could have gotten if they would have been allowed to go further. Like a lot of some kids just stop. I've got an A. What's the like? Particularly if they get like 100% score, um, which is like I have one girl that got 2 top of the world scores that I'm working with, and like everybody was congratulating her, and she says, "I feel fake. I feel frustrated that it's like I think I could do more." Right. So that's one way that grades can limit. But the more important one that is based on the growth mindset and the fixed mindset work for Carl Dweck is that actually if you focus on the result, your actual IQ points go down simply because it works towards perfectionism, so overfixation. It creates more fear of failure. There's massive avoidance that comes with it because the avoidance is kind of like the safe choices. Like if I already have a high score, why would I do anything more difficult? Because it might just prove that I'm not as good as people think I am, right? And comparing is the thief of joy, right? So there's definitely an element of this. And then obviously when a grade doesn't work out, the loss of belonging is very, very tough, right? And you see this sometimes with kids that were really good in kindergarten and in preschool, and as they sort of drift away in because of the way that the class gets segregated, like some of these relationships get really hard, right? So that's one of the many reasons why grade focus is technically not ideal. And then the upside though is really, really good. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't see a place for grades in some form. One of the reasons why I believe grades are so prevalent is because a lot of parents go, how do I trust my teacher? Right. So, because I believe that if you take an example of somebody being a sushi chef in Japan, like you have these amazing sushi chefs that are so good that people want to be apprentices there. And then, in order to be a sushi chef among these kind of masters, you have to first cook rice for years before you're even allowed to touch fish. Um, Now, there's no grading system in that at all the trust is on the on the strength of that master, and that's how traditionally a lot of trades were taught. Like the blacksmith was strong, he would have an apprentice or multiple apprentices, and they would learn until the blacksmith would say, you're now good enough to be on your own. And that's how a lot of education used to work. Unfortunately, it doesn't anymore. And I think that's because parents and teachers don't see each other enough anymore. And the way we try to work with this is me having more time with you in these Q&As, but also my teachers particularly trying to reach out to you as much as you can. So if they're bothering you, it's really trying to show you the positive things that they're doing, so that you know that we trust that we are working with your kids, we are listening to them, we're listening to you. And then I find that a lot of parents are actually okay with not having grades. But that is obviously a bit tough to do for a lot of schools. So unfortunately, grades are there, and the universities there's some that don't, but there's a lot of universities still use these grades. Therefore, we are still bound by them. But what I like to see when I really start working with them, is that once they decide that this is what they want, the grades are normally quite a normal consequence of that. And then they choose to go for the grades themselves. And then actually the grades become a relatively easy thing to obtain for them, particularly for our gifted kids. And you'll find that most of them have higher expectations of themselves So when they start living their own dream, as we say, you'd be surprised how wonderful it is to see. And I'm always happy when, because obviously my dream of helping gifted kids become and do better in Malaysia is my dream. And to a certain extent, a lot of kids, when they first start working to me, enter my dream for where I am. But it is really nice to see when they start going and living their own dream, and we're just happen to be a small part of it. And I really hope that that's where we see a lot of these kids go. Um, I think I have a little bit of time for one more question, and there was an important question that was asked by the group, and I thought it was actually kind of fitting because it fits in this. One of the questions was: is it normal for gifted kids to develop worse writing skills, like that they seem to develop slower than the rest? And the answer to that is yes. Right, a lot of gifted kids develop asynchronously because they're mentally very far advanced, and therefore we expect them to be in advanced as well in their body movements. But our bodies are just biomechanical machines. They need some time to pick up. But what is the biggest challenge is that once they start falling behind, they over focus on other things that they shouldn't. Is very common, right? So there's ways to avoid writing, and one of the tips that some people have is like, oh, you just let them type. And the answer to that is like, no, you need to help them find a meaningful way to practice the motor skills that they need. And there's lots of ways to do this. Sometimes it involves not writing at all. It could also involve like writing like something meaningful in some sort of game format where other people have to decipher what you write. So there's more under time pressure, so that they have to do it, but with some more meaningful thing behind it. But another option is sidestepping it completely, and this is kind of in line with what we're doing with these projects. We want them to learn metacognition. We want them to find their own dreams, and the projects are just a means to an end in this. They're not the end goal, right? So you could do the same when it comes to learning how to write. You could take punch needle stuff. Like we're basically doing punch needle work with the younger ones because it's so hard. But it's very different. It doesn't feel like writing. So the kids that normally struggle with writing and know that they're bad at it and they're avoiding it, they're really trying at the punch needle thing because like they're going to sell it. They're going to make some money out of it. There's a more bigger purpose to it. Therefore, they're willing to deal with the difficulty. They're willing to help each other. And so the answer to the question, do they develop slower? Yes. Does that mean that we have to just accept as that's something that's never going to change? No. Like there's things you can do to learn how to write more neat. Or, you can also just lean into what the doctors do, become really good expert at it, and then just find someone who's clever enough to decipher doctor handwriting, and that seems to work out quite well as well, right? So it's just that you have to live with the fact sometimes that like sometimes writing things sloppily will get you, well, different results than you hoped, and that is okay. Like sometimes that's a source of laughter too. But there, honestly, when you do what we do, like the indirect stuff, they'll pick it up. And I think that's a nice note to leave this at. For those that want to, you can watch this video on YouTube. If there's any more questions, please put them in the questionnaire every week. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. And thank you again for my time with you, or your time with me. You stopped the recording, Fatia? I think so, right?